So my dad eventually left Brookfield, Connecticut. Right before he left, I remember that he was dating a lot of women, and he brought my brother and I out to meet a couple of these ladies that he was dating, and we would go out to dinner. So my father eventually found a house in Brookfield, and he rented in an area called the Shores. It was called the Shores Community, and it was right by the lake. But the thing was that it was notorious for being an area on the lake where people lived who were a little undesirable. That's the best way I could put it. They were known for being troublemakers or people that were slightly low class. So the first house my dad got in the Shores community, it smelled like an old cabin. So now many years later, I realized that that house had a lot of mold in it. I have a video series on this channel called Mold Utilized as a Biological Weapon, and it tells you how to get mold out of your house. But mold is used as a soft kill program by the corrupt government and the military because they want to keep people in a very weak state that they can control. So the house he rented in the Shores smelled like mold, and he stayed there for maybe 6 months or a year, and then he found a house to buy that was also in the Shores, and I don't think it smelled quite as bad, but it also had a stale, musty odor that suggests it had mold growth in it. So he eventually met my stepmother, and her name is Jane, and Jane was an elementary school teacher for many years. And when he met her, she was a principal in the Darien school system. And for those of you who are not familiar with Connecticut, Darien is a very rich town in a very wealthy area of Connecticut. So she was a principal of the elementary school over there. So I believe that she had a condo in Norwalk. And so my father met her. They dated for a little while. And then I think that they moved into a slightly bigger condo, also in Norwalk. So at that point, I did not see my father too much. I was around 15 years old at that time, and I was in my freshman or sophomore year in high school. I did not see my father too often for quite a few years after that, and that was basically due to him living like an hour and a half away. So they eventually found a house in Old Greenwich, Connecticut. And Old Greenwich is a borough of an area called Greenwich, Connecticut. And Greenwich, Connecticut is one of the most upscale areas in Connecticut. So at that time, my father was an insurance salesman. He had been diagnosed with leukemia, and so he lost a lot of weight. He always looked slightly healthy. I don't remember seeing my dad ever looking unhealthy, but he did lose a lot of weight, where once he was like 180 or 190 pounds, and he dropped all that weight and he was like 150, 160 pounds. And so he did not go looking to apply for any other jobs, and instead decided to work for himself as an insurance salesman. So Jane still remained a principal of the Darien school system. So shortly after they moved into that house, maybe after a couple of years, she unexpectedly loses her job in Darien, and they don't give her a very good reason. But this is the sort of thing that happens when a woman marries somebody like my father. So she had taught school, elementary school, I would say, since she was straight out of college for maybe 10 years. And then she was promoted to be a principal for another 5 or 10 years. Then she meets my father, and then for some reason, she is fired from her position as principal at Darien Elementary School. It will not make sense to most Americans why the agency does this, but it is a process that they want to break everybody down. That is how they control everybody, by breaking everybody down. And it seems that they like the most broken people with the biggest problems, because that is who the military can control the easiest. Some of you who have looked this information up on the internet may have heard about these programs in where the military blackmails certain officials and politicians. They may invite them over to a party where they have an after party later on that night where they bring in drugs and prostitutes and sometimes underage prostitutes. And they have the whole house, this military brothel, all fitted with hidden cameras. So they catch these politicians or these executives or these officials in the act of using drugs or having sex with underage prostitutes or having sex with underage kids. And that is how the military will control these people from that point on. And it gets worse than that. What the military is looking to do is to have a class of people without morality, without ethics, without compassion. And they want these unthinking, unfeeling creatures to be in control of society, to be the heads of all the major corporations, to be the heads of all the government agencies, to be all your politicians, to be the only type of people that you will see whenever you turn on the TV. And that's the same thing that happened in Europe. This process has gone back into ancient times. If you research the royal families and you hear about all these terrible things that these royal houses did, involving torturing people, involving killing people, involving how they treated their civilians. Many of you may not want to hear this, but this is how the major churches and religions around the world have maintained control. No matter what country that you go to, no matter what religion that you are talking about, this is how these large religious groups, these religious cults, control their countries by promoting very unmoral, unethical type people into positions of power. So if you ever hear about certain queens that would bathe in blood, or certain kings that would execute criminals and then leave their bodies rotting up on display, these are all the types of people that the religious heads will promote going back into ancient times. So they want to break everybody, and then they promote the people who are the most disturbed, because they know those people will never try to stand up to these religious cults, to the military, and they will do whatever they are commanded to do, which is usually more dirt to the American people. The education system is currently under attack by the U.S. military. It used to be that the educators made up the higher middle class, the upper middle class, people with a little bit of money, meaning that they had a little bit more money than just making ends meet. And honestly, this is good for society. These are the people that will always hire you if you're into landscaping or carpentry, or if you go door to door collecting donations. These are the people that will help you. These are the people that promote a healthy economy and a healthy society. And these are the people who are currently under attack. The class of educators, people that teach school, college professors, they're very educated people. I think they need a master's or a doctor's degree to teach. And in turn, I think they start at anywhere from $50,000 to $80,000 a year. So currently, they are now hiring people that have a certificate to teach. They go to school for a certain number of months, and they are given a certificate to teach. I personally know educators that have master's degrees, and they are teaching side by side with people that have certificates. They took a class for a certain amount of months or a year, and were given a teaching certificate. And those are the type of people our current government is allowing to teach your children. So this is an attack on the educators. So Jane was doing pretty good. She had taught school for 10 years, and then she was promoted to be a principal for another 5 or 10 years. So she meets my father, they get a house together, and then she loses her job as a principal. Jane always worked very hard. Jane always respected her peers and her boss. Jane always made it to work on time, and Jane always performed her duties at her job. So they fired her basically for no reason. So another tactic of the military to break people down is to give them jobs with a long commute. People have to understand that the whole thing of the U.S. military taking over society has to do with breaking that society down. They have all different psychological programs to do that. So if you watch this whole series, you'll begin to learn most of them. So if you're looking for a job and it's going on months, 6 months, a year, and you cannot find a job, you may start to get a little desperate, and suddenly they have an opportunity for you, but it's an hour and a half away. So that's adding 3 hours onto your day. So if they want you to work for a 9-hour shift, you'll be working a 12-hour day, 5 days a week, with an hour and a half commute. And that psychologically wears on people to the point when they get home, they cannot do anything else. All they can do is collapse on the sofa and watch TV. They cannot get interested in what their kids are doing. Their brains aren't functioning too well to psychoanalyze all these bills. If something goes wrong with the house, they can't really look into what's happening at their house. They'll just hire somebody to come in and fix it at whatever charge that person comes up with. So they are continuously ripped off and manipulated by these corporations that understand that these people are worn out. And if they have mold growing in their house and they're putting in 12-hour days, commuting 3 hours every day, this is a process to break people down. This is how they do it. So my father comes to the rescue of Jane, and he told me the story when it was just him and I. And he started the conversation and he said something like Jane's whole world was turned upside down. She had no idea why she was being fired, and it was most unexpected. So we did not know what we were going to do. So luckily enough, I just happened to be in New Fairfield on a business trip, and I heard that the elementary school in New Fairfield was looking for a principal. So New Fairfield, Connecticut is right next to Brookfield, and that was where I lived with my mother, brother, and stepfather. So when my father goes home and tells Jane the news, she is overjoyed, and she rushes over to meet the people that are hiring for that job. And as luck would have it, she gets the job working as a principal for the New Fairfield Elementary School. So this is the bizarre part. So I want everybody to listen up, especially you women. This is something that these guys will do when you marry them. They were in the market for a new house. I guess property values went up in Old Greenwich, and they could make a lot of money on the sale of the house. So they put their house on the market, and they began looking to buy a new house. So where do you think the ideal place would be to buy a house if you just landed a high-paying job in New Fairfield and your spouse works for himself in his home office as an insurance agent? And the correct answer would be right next to New Fairfield, if not in New Fairfield itself. So by moving into that area, Jane would have no commute. She could get to work very quickly. And a second benefit to moving closer to New Fairfield would be that my father would be closer to his 2 kids because we lived right next door. But instead, my father insists that they move to Shelton, Connecticut. So Shelton, Connecticut is something like an hour and 20 minutes away from New Fairfield. My father has no family in Shelton. My father has no business in Shelton. I've never heard my father mention the town of Shelton once. In fact, from what I remember, my dad was always traveling to the Danbury area to sell insurance. So I cannot figure out why on earth my father would insist that they move to Shelton when Jane had enough money to move wherever she wanted to. But Jane goes along with him, and they get a house in Shelton, Connecticut. And Jane has to commute an hour and a half in the morning and an hour and a half at night, 3 hours a day, every day, because my father is so self-centered and so out of touch with reality that he'll insist that she goes through that as his wife. So I'm sure some of you could figure out it goes beyond that. This is what these insiders do to their family members. This is how the Flower of Life program works. This is how they break you down. So at that point, I guess around a year or two after moving to Shelton and commuting every day to work in New Fairfield, Jane begins to experience a problem. And she says at night, she wakes up with panic attacks and she feels like she is shaking. And that is a description that is used over and over and over again by people who are attempting to describe being hit with these radio frequency mind control weapons. They are called projected energy weapons. They often do this to the target when they are sleeping. And there is a very specific reason why the military would direct these energy streams at your house. And you could find some of that information in a very important video series found on this channel called Under Fire, Radio Frequency Warfare. And it is basically something they use in programs such as MK to control the populace. So Jane also reported that at her job in New Fairfield, they began to watch her critically. So this is also a process in MK and that is as they are putting you into an agitated state using this radio frequency energy technology, they will then begin to subtly harass you in your workplace, out in society, at the mall. And what that does, obviously, is it destabilizes your life. It breaks another civilian down. So that is why they wanted her to get a job in New Fairfield, because that whole school was filled with military agents, and they get their certificate to teach math or history or English, and then they take their high quality people and they put them into a place like New Fairfield. And then it's a lot of fun to take someone like Jane, who's just an ordinary woman, and then give her a 3-hour commute. Then after a year of being principal at the elementary school, they'll begin to put her into a highly agitated state with their radio frequency technology. And then when she gets to work, all of their agents are trained to walk around and stare at her funny all day long as if she is doing something wrong. And everybody notices it. So Jane, being very educated and well-spoken, put it into those terms. They were all watching me critically. So of course my father told her, then you have to go to a doctor. And a doctor referred her to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist said, you are having a mental breakdown and you no longer have the ability to be a principal. So it's best to just retire early and live on your retirement and live on your savings and then sit in your house all day, where we could get somebody take over your position. And it works out real well for the people who will take a 2 or 3 week long training seminar or whatever they do to get this teaching certificate that qualifies them to teach school. And they'll get paid whatever they get paid to replace you, the person with a master's degree or a doctor's degree who worked hard and studied hard their whole life to be an educator, because this is an attack on America. You're now being replaced by the high quality people with this teacher's certificate. All these wonderful people, they're all put into one school. All these wonderful people will all know the game, which is to all stare real funny and strangely at the new principal they'll all understand that that is the real reason they're there at that school. Not to teach kids, but to harass the lady who has the audacity to come in and think that she's everybody's boss because she just got hired as a principal. So the intellect of the people they promote in these programs are people that are slightly below average intelligence, and they're prone to fits of jealousy, anger, and rage. So that is who the military likes to choose, because they'll never put up a fight and they are very easy to control. You could trigger these people to do anything. So to tell you a little bit about Jane, Jane was kind of a very conservative, serious woman. She was pleasant, she was relatively intelligent, she was well spoken, and she was educated. She came from Brooklyn, New York, and she lived with her mother. And I guess her father died when he was relatively young, I guess in his 60s, and he died due to complications concerning alcoholism. He had health complications like a failing liver, and he died at a relatively young age. So Jane's mother was a very serious woman. She liked to paint. So Jane had paintings all over her house, and some of them were quite good. I recently went over to the state capitol in New Hampshire, and I looked at some of the paintings that were chosen from the people who paint in the New Hampshire area. I expected a little higher quality painting in these museums at the state capitol in Concord. And I can tell you now that Jane's mom's paintings were just as good, if not better, than the ones that they had in Concord in the museum. So I guess she was kind of a tough older lady. She loved Brooklyn. She did not want to move out of Brooklyn. She liked her apartment. And even after she got mugged in Brooklyn, somebody hit her in the head and stole her purse, she still would not move out of her neighborhood. She liked her apartment and she liked where she was. I do not know for sure, but she also acted like she was an educated woman, and she did not have a thick New York accent and would enunciate her words carefully so that she sounded well spoken. I do know that Jane was married and divorced before she met my father. My father was her second husband. So after she marries my dad, she loses her job that she's had for 5 or 10 years in Darien, working as a principal. She gets a job in New Fairfield at the elementary school, working as a principal. Then they buy a house in Shelton, and during her work days, she complains of everybody watching her critically, which is a perfect choice of words, because Jane is the principal at the elementary school. And does everybody know what the principal is? The principal is everybody's boss. The principal runs that school. The principal is in charge of all the teachers. The principal is in charge of the office. The principal is in charge of the custodians. The principal is in charge of everybody in that building. So why are the people that work for you going to watch you critically? Why are they all watching their boss critically? I know when I go to work, the last thing I want to do is watch my boss critically. I want to get along good with my boss. I want to make my boss's job easier. I want to assist my boss. The last thing I'm going to do is have the time or the nerve to walk around and watch my boss critically, as if I'm secretly in control for whatever reason. That is the attitude of this MK Ultra program. The principal is not in charge of the teachers and all the staff at that elementary school. They are. They've been there the longest. The order of those who have teacher certificates secretly hate this new principal with a master's degree, and we're all going to critically watch her. That is the hallmark of a program out of MK Ultra, to remove any and all normal people out of society and replace it with their insiders. So I really wish that I could figure out some way to show you what the insiders look like, so you could get an idea of those people who are chosen to advance in these different programs as the military takes over society. I've racked my brain and I cannot figure out how to show you what these people are. So maybe some of you could figure out how those of us that are exposing this can do that better. Because once you take a look at what these people are, that answers a lot of questions about why America is run the way it is.